and your client need to know this about appeals if you're going to move forward in this area. 2, we're going to talk about the basics of bail. And then number 3, we're going to look at better written advocacy, which to me is the real focus of what this talk is all about today. Okay, I want to start with things you and your client need to understand about appeals, because I believe appeals are fairly misunderstood, especially by clients, but also by lawyers. So things, if you're going to actually start doing any sort of appeal, these are things that I didn't know and that you need to know if you're going to go forward. And I've grouped these into a couple of areas. So 1, who should do the appeal? I'm going to talk about that. Then I'll talk about pricing the appeal, explaining outcomes, which people don't do very well. 4, I want to talk about timing. Timing is a big deal for appeals. People don't understand that, but there are a lot of timing issues you need to be aware of. 5, the importance of knowing your local rules. And number 6, like, should they appeal? And then I'll get into more about the content of what appeals are. Okay, so there's a lot to cover because appeals are a complex beast. So let us dig into these questions in a bit more detail. Oh, sorry. Then I have finding grounds of appeal, the magic secret sauce, as I put it. Okay, so let's start with number 1. Who should handle an appeal? And this is that question because a lot of you may or may not do appeals. There is a question of like, you know, what are the things you need to decide whether you're going to appeal? So first of all, like, there are people across Canada who specialize in appeals. And it's funny that I remember during the legal aid issues that were going on in Alberta, they're still, of course, going on. But of course, the crisis point of, you know, job action against legal aid is no longer a real thing. And I remember hearing the word that came up the most when people were speaking derisively of other lawyers who were not criminal lawyers was dabbler. You're a dabbler. If you come in and try and do this case and you try and do this thing, you're a dabbler. And like, it's funny that very few criminal lawyers realize that, like, that's the word I use for people who try and do appeals in and out. And I'm not trying to suggest that you can't get up to doing appeals. I'm just trying to say, if you just decide to take on this one appeal because you think it might be fun, I think you got to know appellate counsel and get some help and guidance and mentorship along the way, because like, I can't tell you the number of bad appeals that I see. It's a high number. They usually get bounced pretty quickly. And I think that's partly because the people who come in and just try and do this on the fly think, well, it's just like what I did in law school. It's really not. And there's a lot more to it than that. And I think, like, speaking with appellate counsel, if you're going to enter into this area, is really important. And I guess the point I want to make and just finish up with is just say, like, just because you're a criminal lawyer doesn't make you an appellate lawyer. And that's just really important. And I say that as someone who tries not to dabble too much at trial work, because like, I just don't jump into it, because it's not that I don't think I could do it. It's just that I don't want to make basic mistakes surrounding it. And that happens all the time with dabbler appeals. So, I mean, my personal feeling is that appellate counsel are there for a reason. And there are very few people who just do appeals, but like, people with experience doing appeals are the ones who should start out doing appeals. And if you want to become one of those people, learn how to do appeals, ideally by second chairing on a bunch of appeals with seasoned appellate counsel. But anyway, that's my first point. And then that question of, well, when are you ready? Well, the issue of when are you ready is sort of different for everybody. But like, again, I think that appeals can go so wrong so quickly if you're not careful, that like, the way to get ready is by assisting on other appeals, working with appellate counsel, and eventually becoming an appellate counsel yourself. So again, because so many things can go wrong, and they can really go wrong for the client, I just think you should take care in getting ready. And most importantly is my answer to the next question, because like, your most ready source of appeals, if you are not an appellate lawyer who is sought out for appeals, is your own trials. And you may want to do it. Sometimes you'll feel so bad about the trial. There are people who offer to do it pro bono. I am not one of those people, but some people are. that is one of the biggest problems in appeal law today, is that so many lawyers start doing appeals by appealing their own trial defeat. And my personal view is that this very famous quote by Abraham Lincoln, let's just say that I realize you are not the client, but he who represents himself on his own appeal has a fool for a client. I do believe that. I believe very strongly that appealing your own trial loss is almost never a good idea. And the exceptions to that rule are so few and far between that my basic feeling is it's just easier to say you should never appeal your own trial defeat. And I'm going to tell you why. Like, I'm not just trying to get business here, although that's a happy circumstance of the way this works. I think that appealing your own is a real concern. Here are the 3 reasons why you should never appeal your own trial defeat. And I don't mean, by the way, I don't mean an office should never appeal their own trial defeat. I think that has some perils. You're going to see, I'm going to list 3 reasons, right, why you shouldn't do it. But I mean, obviously, when I worked with Batos Law Group, I appealed cases from that firm, and there is still a few risks to that, but the risks are much smaller. So I don't think this applies across the bar. I'm talking about you are trial counsel. Why shouldn't you appeal your own? Okay, there are 3 reasons. The first is that you cannot establish the much needed legal distance from your case because you were counsel at trial. My biggest advantage at trial, at appeal, honestly, in every case, is that if the court comes up to me and says, well, why did counsel do that? Why didn't counsel object? Why didn't counsel do X, Y, Z? Did counsel do this? I'm not trial counsel. So I have a nice handy distance. I can say things like, well, I'm not sure why, but they really should have. Or it doesn't matter why, because don't get distracted by that. That's not important. I cannot stress enough that no matter how well you think you acted at trial number 1, the risks of not being able to establish legal distance are high in every case. Now, again, if we wanted to quibble, we could say there are some exceptions to this rule. There are cases where legal distance doesn't matter. For example, let's say you objected to your client wanted to have a French language trial, and you put that on the record and made clear, and the judge, for one reason or another, didn't give it, right? Didn't say you could have a French language trial. Like, in those cases, like, you don't really need legal distance. The issue is pretty much, a one issue thing. It's segmented and you are not at risk. But again, like, it just seems to me like legal distance is never a disadvantage. Never. So I always think it's something you should be considering. So that's number 1.
Listen up. If you're a lawyer or studying to become one, you should check out this book. Professor Sankoff's Guide to Persuasive Legal Writing has received rave reviews from lawyers and students who have used it to improve their skills. It's jam-packed with tips and tricks to help you boost your writing, craft memorable intros, advocate without sounding like an advocate, and structure your work to make it more effective before the courts. Take advantage of Professor Sankoff's years of experience in teaching legal writers, mentoring young advocates, and filing factums at courts across Canada. The simple truth? This book will make you a better writer. Period. Get your copy at petersankoff.com.